Welcome, everyone. It's exciting to be at the end of the symposium. I appreciate all the great comments and presenters that we've had today, and we've got one last set of great presentations. So thank you for joining us for this presentation about some lessons learned during gleaning during COVID from the folks at Food Forward. We're going to have Samantha and Dory with us today, and they're going to share some of the ways in which they're managing volunteers during this crazy time, and just some great learnings that they have from their organization. So I'm excited for that. I'm going to let them introduce their slides and get going. Thanks, everyone. Please make sure you ask questions in the little chalkboard. I'm sure you've all figured it out by now, and vote those up and down, and we'll take those questions at the end. So thanks again.
Hey everyone, welcome. We're excited to see you guys here today. And today we are with Food Forward, and today we will be presenting a case study about the backyard harvesting case study on how gleaning during COVID-19 changed the way we operate for the better. We do recommend having this particular presentation on full screen, as we do have a lot of text and photos that we would love for all of you to see. All right, so this is us. We can't see each other face to face, but we wanted to introduce ourselves. We're your co-presenters today. So Samantha Teslick on the left is the Senior Manager of the Backyard Harvest Program. And myself on the right, Dory Bennett, I am the Backyard Harvest Program Supervisor. So welcome. And these are our learning goals for the day. And we do want to say that this is a case study. These are the learning goals that worked for us and things we utilized during the COVID-19 pandemic. But we do think that they're applicable to any gleaning organization of any size. And so those learning goals are: what are the different roles volunteers can serve for your gleaning operation? What are volunteer and donor needs and limitations? Best practices for remote training and engagement, and how to have a big impact without many volunteers.
So before we dig into all of that, we just wanted to give you a little bit more information about who we are. So Food Forward is a food recovery nonprofit organization that's been around since 2009 with a mission to fight hunger and prevent food waste by rescuing fresh, surplus produce, connecting this abundance with people in need, and inspiring others to do the same. We do so with the help of 3 different produce recovery programs, which we'll go into in a short video in just a moment. And those are the Backyard Harvest Program, which Dory and I both represent today. We also have a farmers market recovery program, as well as a wholesale produce recovery program. And for Backyard Harvest, the primary crop that we deal with are citrus fruit. The areas of LA and Ventura County that we do our gleaning efforts in were historically large and presently still in Ventura County, huge agricultural areas for citrus. And all of the produce that these 3 programs recover, all of the produce recovered from these programs is distributed to hunger relief agencies in 7 states. So to date, our organization as a whole has recovered over 180 million pounds of produce. But just from the Backyard Harvest Program alone, we brought in 3.75 million pounds since 2009. Our wholesale recovery program, as you'll see in just a second, is the big heavy hitter as far as pounds go.
Yeah, guys, we're not getting audio on the video. Not sure why.
Muted?
Pounds with the help of 111 trained Glean team leaders, and we're able to distribute all of that produce to 60.
Dory, can you start it over?
Yes. In 2020,
I didn't know if that was me. Sorry, guys.
For Food Forward's Backyard Harvest Program, we work with public and private fruit donors who have fruit trees on their properties that simply produce more than they can eat. So we get our volunteers to harvest any fruit that otherwise would be wasted and redirect it to the partners that we serve. In 2020, we had our fair share of challenges, but our volunteers and fruit donors really stepped up, and in total, we harvested over 475,000 pounds of fresh produce, and it was our biggest year ever. In 2021, safety is our top priority. We want to make sure that our volunteer event leaders are out there having fun, picking as much fruit as possible, but in a safe manner. And we're really looking forward to adding to our base of volunteer event leaders to help increase our picking power.
the Farmers Market Recovery Program sends volunteers out to various farmers markets throughout LA and Ventura counties. At the end of the market, we go up to all of the vendors that have produce, fruits, vegetables, and ask them if they would like to make a donation. A lot of them have excess produce that is, perfectly good, but they just have too much of it and they don't want it to go to waste.
Instead of throwing away vegetables, we get to put these vegetables into some good hands and get it to some people who will use it wisely. We're very glad that we can donate to Food Forward and that these people are going to get some very healthy food options.
In 2020, we recovered over 400,000 pounds with the help of 111 trained Glean team leaders, and we're able to distribute all that produce to 69 of our receiving agencies. In 2020, we hit a big milestone. We recovered our 4 millionth pound as a program since we started in 2012. It was a very fruitful year. In 2021, we hope to get back to all 24 of our markets that we gleaned before the pandemic started. We hope that we can start engaging our general volunteers again and be able to get more produce out into the community.
The Wholesale Produce Recovery Program procures produce from produce wholesalers and food service providers. In 2020, we had a large uptake in donations during the end of March and the beginning of April because all the food service providers weren't able to sell everything that they had in cold storage. We were able to collect almost 61 million pounds. We opened the pit stop in June of 2019, and it almost felt like we were preparing the whole time prior to the pandemic for this particular year. We had the systems and our capacity was in place to be able to react accordingly. In 2021, our focus is gonna be on making sure that we recover as much produce as we did in 2020 by increasing our relationships with our existing donors and creating new ones. The fact that the produce that we collected is going to the places that need it the most means everything to me. It lets me know that we're doing something great and we're allowing people in those communities to have a steady supply of fruits and vegetables.
So that was a video that we made recently for a fundraising event. So it focuses a lot on the past year. But to kind of look at pre-pandemic, how the Backyard Harvest Program operated as kind of an average year snapshot, we hosted 927 volunteer-powered harvest events with the help of 4,350 volunteers, bringing in over 350,000 pounds of, again, primarily citrus fruit. And all of that was donated to 171 hunger relief agencies. And this is, again, like, we understand our organization may be different than, you got it, Dory?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Our organization, we're just giving you this for perspective, but we really feel like a lot of the lessons we're going to go over today really can be applicable to groups of any size. So our normal operations were led by our PIC leaders, or our trained volunteer leaders, and supported by general volunteers that we recruit online through our website. So while they were out there and not a lot of staff are on site at our events, our small team of staff did a lot of the legwork assisting those leads in many ways, including dropping off boxes and equipment, picking up and delivering fruit to agencies, as well as doing so for our DIY homeowners. We have a lot of our fruit donors that are happy to pick the fruit, but want us to do everything else. And we really catered to them, doing a lot of the back and forth and different things to make it as easy as possible on those folks. We also relied on agencies that we served to pick up fruit on site majority time at the properties, and the delivery of fruit from the site of where it was picked to where it was being donated was something we did not ask of our DIY fruit donors or volunteer leaders unless it was absolutely necessary.
And so as far as we were aware, 2020 was going to continue on the same pace. And it was off to a really amazing start. From January 1st to March 15th, the Backyard Harvest Program hosted 421 harvest events. We did that with the help of over 1,700 general volunteers, and we were able to pick over 152,000 pounds. And this was on pace to be an absolutely record-breaking year. This is the most we had ever harvested in that period of time. And as we all know, life changed pretty dramatically. COVID-19 hit in March. Our offices closed and all of our operations stopped March 15th. Our program was put on pause. All programs were put on pause. And we in the Backyard Harvest Program canceled 37 future scheduled harvests through March. And at this point, we didn't know enough about the virus that we felt safe having our volunteers out. We didn't really understand how it was spread. And we thought that, at this point, safety was our number one priority. And we also were not sure if our volunteers would even be interested in going out to harvest. And so this was a very big concern for us. And all of our recruitment of any volunteers completely stopped. At this point, we were on pace for a record-breaking year, and we were prepared to see a very large hit to our entire impact. But we came together as a team, did a lot of brainstorming, and implemented some major changes. One of those major changes was the development of COVID-19 protocols for all of our constituents. That included exempt from stay-at-home orders for all of our volunteers in the field, sanitizing protocols requiring of wearing face coverings at harvests, and a lot of strict rules around contact between different stakeholders, volunteers and homeowners, volunteers and our agency partners. And something we also really changed was that our trained leads were only going to be harvesting solo or with people they knew or people they lived with only. And within a very quick time frame, we were back harvesting March 28th.
So we were feeling good. We were opening up again, but we were left with some really big questions, and we're just kind of feeling a little insecure about, can we do this? Can we still have an impact with a fraction of our volunteers? We were hearing from the agencies that we serve that the need was literally, quadruple of what it had been a week before. So we felt a lot of pressure to deliver, but we knew we were only working with a small fraction of the volunteers we had before. We are also struggling with how we were going to tackle the large properties that we work with. While we're called the Backyard Harvest Program, and many of the properties are just 1 or 2 trees, we also work with a lot of larger hobby farms or even some working farms that call us in. And without the ability to bring in groups of 50, let alone, groups of 10, we just weren't sure how we were going to be able to operate. We were also concerned about how we were going to be able to engage our volunteers remotely, where we'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment. But, in addition to these harvest events, we really pride ourselves on making our volunteers feel like they're part of the family and hosting a lot of different events in person. And we knew that wasn't something we were going to be able to do, and we're concerned about keeping folks engaged. And finally, our fruit donors, were they going to be up for doing more? We were going to be asking more of them than ever, and just really weren't unsure how they were going to react. Many of them treat us like a service, and previously didn't react well when we asked more of them. So again, at the time, bringing together any size group of people from different households was just a risk we weren't willing to take. So that pushed us to the birth of a new volunteer role we called the solo harvester. So this was a whole new position with a different set of expectations. They weren't going out with any general volunteers. We were asking them to go out by themselves or with, at this point, early on in the pandemic, cohabitants or people that they actually lived with. And over time, we expanded that to friends and family. And we're asking them to go out and follow all of our new safety protocols, as well as make sure that anyone they bring with them is compliant as well. And while we knew we probably would have some folks within our existing pool of volunteer leaders who'd be interested in the solo harvester role, we had to recruit more in order to have a chance at making any sort of impact. So we reached out to our pool of general volunteers, people that had attended a harvest or two in a non-leadership role, to see if anyone would be interested. And it was also the first time that we ever offered a volunteer, more of a dedicated volunteer position for folks who had never previously volunteered. It's something that we thought was a requirement before, that they had been to an event. And this time we are kind of opening up the floodgates, and not sure how it was going to turn out. We also revisited the pitch around this position and really tried to simplify the role. There's less responsibility because you don't need to work with general volunteers. And we were hoping that this would be of interest to folks who maybe that responsibility and leadership was something that they may have put them off in the past. But we really had no idea what was going to happen.
We also knew that we were going to need to ask our volunteers to do more. And we were unsure exactly how they would react to this. This is a pretty divergence from how we were operating beforehand. But for safety reasons, we knew we needed to approach this differently. And one of the major changes we made was a new emphasis on dropping off at agencies. Before the pandemic, we pretty much always tried to have agencies pick up the fruit at the property. And with no understanding of really how COVID was spread at this point, we wanted as few points of contact of this produce as possible. And so to have the amazing volunteers drive that to the agency, it was just one less step and one less person having contact with this fruit. And so this was something we really asked, and that did include sometimes driving or traveling further to deliver that fruit than before the pandemic. Another big ask was picking up equipment. We do provide our volunteers with a certain amount of equipment, but they do need to re-up their store. And a lot of the time it was staff who were often going directly to volunteers' homes and dropping that equipment off. But we needed to reframe that ask, and they needed to be more proactive and pick up supplies at one of our established equipment hubs or our office. And we did also have a more pointed ask on harvesting certain properties. Beforehand, we really gave complete power to our volunteers. They could pick whatever property they wanted, pick the time. But at this point, agencies really were in need of produce to give to clients. And so we did push our volunteers to harvest certain properties that agencies said they needed. For instance, an orange property versus a grapefruit property. We were starting to funnel them to pick certain types of produce over others. And we also asked ourselves, can our volunteers fill other roles? And one of those roles we debated was a volunteer driver. Where we're harvesting, we're in LA and Ventura County, there are pretty rural locations where it's not always easy to navigate or find. And so to have a driver that's able to connect that produce from a somewhat hard to find location to an agency would be a really big help. And so that's definitely something we wanted to explore. And a really big question we had is, how are we going to tackle these large properties? We know that there's the exact same amount of fruit on those trees, but we have fewer volunteers. With our new COVID restrictions, there was really only one option, as that was to send out one volunteer or small groups out to properties many, many times. We understood putting this plan together that this would be more coordination on staff. We would have to organize many more individual harvests, but we'd see how it went. And a big part of making this successful was communicating with these large properties and orchard owners to understand our limitations while also managing their expectations. We were not going to be able to send out 50 volunteers at once. That was just not going to be an option. And we had to frame that we were not sure at this point if we were going to be able to get all the fruit. We would definitely try, but we couldn't promise that.
Another area, we'd never done virtual engagement trainings of any sort before. So in order to get all of these new folks trained, we had to switch to a Zoom platform. And as all of you know, even today, technical difficulties happen and they can throw things off a little bit. So we were just really nervous about how that was going to go. Again, we were opening it up to folks who have never volunteered before. And so it pushed us, we felt we needed to create a short and distance in-field training to give a little bit of a hands-on experience to make sure that people weren't deciding to become a volunteer, a dedicated volunteer with us, and then find out they hate picking fruit. So that was one of the things that we had to set up and weren't really sure how it was going to go. It also pushed us we needed to brainstorm a lot of different volunteer engagement activities. Previously, we hosted summer barbecues, movie nights, holiday parties, mini golf, happy hour, all that sort of thing. And they were really wonderful, but they were all in person. So it really left us feeling insecure about our ability to help to continue to foster this community. And again, our fruit donors, in addition to managing their expectations, we needed to ask them to do more. So we were working really hard to shift our ask and really do what we could to empower folks to pick their own fruit. Again, if you remember back to, spring of 2020, a lot of people weren't even comfortable going to the grocery store and food was scarce for everyone. So we, again, kind of switched up our ask and really just promoted if you can pick some of your fruit and leave it out on your sidewalk or something to share with the community, which was something we'd never done before. Usually we're all about recording the pounds and trying to get it to an agency, but we were really shifting what our ask was and had to generally just set limits on what we can and can't do, which was outside of our previous nature. We also, again, even if we were, it wasn't a DIY, we're sending a volunteer, a solo harvester to pick. We had new policies that we were putting in place on those homeowners, asking them to stay inside where our volunteers harvest before they come out and thank them and, maybe give them directions on what to do. But we were really putting pressure on them to stay inside just for safety's sake, and weren't really sure what the reaction was going to be.
And so we thought about all this a lot. We put together a million workflows and we implemented these changes, and we waited to see if they would work. At this point, we were kind of crossing our fingers and just to wait to see what the metrics unfolded. And guess what? It worked, and it was possible. All of these plans that we had spent a lot of time formulating really ended up being a big success. And even more surprising is, ultimately COVID-19 forced us to break bad habits, many of which we were not even aware were bad habits, but we were not exactly interested in going back to some of the ways we operated before COVID. And to our surprise, not only did our operations continue to hum along, they flourished. And one of the big takeaways for us was this new volunteer role we had created, which was the solo harvester role. And we discovered solo harvesters are very, very effective. One trained volunteer can accomplish just as much as 3 to 4 general volunteers. And this was a pretty big takeaway for us. With only one trained volunteer out in the field, the focus was simply just on harvesting the fruit. They weren't worried about training or managing other volunteers. And interestingly enough, we didn't realize we were somewhat bogging down our best picker in the field. And it was such a notion to us because we had previously thought that all of our properties needed multiple harvesters, which just is not the case. A lot of our properties can be picked by 1 or 2 volunteers quite effectively. And at the same time, we'd also done a survey around this time to gear interest for harvesting. And one of the biggest takeaways, interestingly enough, that our volunteers said is that we weren't asking them to do enough. They wanted us to ask them to do more. So we took them up on this opportunity and we did ask them to do more. And they really liked it. And one of the really big things that they liked, other than just this extra responsibility and the trust that we gave them, was dropping off at agencies. It was a really full circle experience for them. Rather than just picking that fruit, which was great, they were actually able to see directly the impact that the fruit was making. They were handing it directly to the agencies or the clients, and it really solidified that experience for them. And it also reinvigorated some of our volunteers. If they had a meaningful interaction while dropping off at an agency, we could see in our metrics that they started harvesting more regularly. And on a staff note, it was a big lift for staff not to have to worry about that fruit getting picked up at those properties. We knew when a volunteer was dropping that produce off at an agency, that fruit made it to its final destination to people who needed it. So it was quite a relief on a personal note.
It also highlighted to us that solo harvesters on our end are a lot easier to manage. General volunteers are a ton of work. So without general volunteers at harvest, our trained leaders didn't need to worry about managing and watching general volunteers during the harvest to make sure everyone is safe. We didn't have to deal, our solo harvesters show up, they're dedicated. General volunteers often don't show up, cancel at the last minute, bring their mom or somebody else that wasn't registered, and we may not have equipment, or could throw off those solo harvester or our lead volunteers. So when we're just dealing with people that we know how to do this, it was a lot easier on us. And again, as Dory mentioned, the solo harvesters really enjoyed it as well. That said, we definitely will be opening up our events to general volunteers in the future. To date, we still have not opened up to general volunteers. We're looking to start doing that slowly in the summertime. But a big reason we haven't been rushed to is because our solo harvesters have been so effective. But again, volunteers are key to building the food forward community. It's a big part of our mission to engage with them. So we will be engaging them once in the future, even though it's been kind of nice to not have so many of them. But we will be much more strategic about how we use them. So rather than at every single event recruiting 1 to 2 plus, we'll use them strategically at large properties where the help is definitely needed. Again, you know, the solo harvester role we found was really much more casual and revealed a missed opportunity for us in the past. The reason I think that our solo harvesters are such a huge success is because they're people that just really like picking the fruit. And so by having less emphasis on leadership, it removed the barrier of having to, you know, be in charge, and just opened it up for people who just want to pick some fruit by themselves. We call it fruit therapy. I'm sure all of you know it's really nice to be out there on your own and just gleaning in nature. Or they could go out with their friends and family and, you know, be in charge of them, but it's a little bit different than total strangers. So it really highlighted a missed opportunity for us. And it also seen a handful of parent-child duos join us, getting trained, and they've found it's a really great, you know, intro to volunteering and for teens. They're able to get service hours, and was a great way for families to spend time together. So it also, as I mentioned, was the first time we were training folks who hadn't previously volunteered, which we were really nervous about, and found out maybe that was a little bit unnecessary, which is a great lesson for us to learn. We had an overwhelming interest to participate amongst folks that were new to the organization. And this level of interest is definitely unusual. The high, I think we had 100 people in the first few days of mentioning it in a newsletter that expressed interest. And we definitely can say is in part due to the people's desire just to get out of their house and do something productive. But we did find this role definitely appeals to a different type of volunteer, and is something that we should not be so specific about who can and cannot do this in the future. You know, one of the reasons we were very hesitant is typically 50% of trainees that start the process actually complete it, which, as I'm sure you all know, training people takes a lot of time and effort. So to only have 50% follow through is okay, but we didn't want to see that be any less. And surprisingly enough, the solo harvester training rate of completion was closer to 80%. So again, we were mistaken about, you know, whether or not it would work, and to our surprise, had even better retention rate with just these solo harvesters.
And another big takeaway, which we were a little surprised about in a happy way, was that harvesting these big properties is possible. And we ended up harvesting just as much fruit at these large properties with fewer volunteers than previously. And we did exactly what we had planned. We sent volunteers, individuals, and small groups out to properties multiple times. And it was a very interesting experience because we'd have volunteers who we require about once a month, and we'd have volunteers who would go to one of these big properties and take a sense of ownership over these properties, a sense of comfort. They started to know the orchard, they'd own the orchard, and they got this huge sense of confidence and were really reinvigorated and would start going to these big properties multiple times a month, which was really amazing to see volunteers that previously hadn't been very active start being incredibly active. And at the end of the day, it was more coordination on staff, but in some cases it was much easier. These large orchards that we're working with can be anything from a working farm where they do have staff on site harvesting. It could be a private entity like a museum. And they can also be public spaces like parks. And so pitching a small group of individuals to come out to one of these operations is a lot easier. It's a much less of an interruption than saying, hey, can we bring 50, maybe 100 volunteers out here? And that might just completely stop the farming operation or take up a parking lot at a park or something like that. So it's really a much easier ask, which was lovely. And it did allow for a lot more flexibility with coordinating these harvests on timing, as well as just dates. So it was a really lovely added benefit for staff. And a really good case study of this in specific is the Huntington Gardens located in San Marino. It's a private museum and botanical gardens that happens to have a full orange grove. To give you a frame of what our normal operations at a larger harvest, a larger property would be, is 2019. So in 2019 at the Huntington Gardens, we hosted 9 unique harvest events with over 330 volunteers. And we were able to glean 18,250 pounds of fruit. In 2020, we hosted 62 harvest events and had 30 unique volunteers. Of those 30, 3 volunteers ended up harvesting more than 10 times, which is pretty incredible. And we were able to harvest almost 16,000 pounds of fruit. And this was a very big wake-up call to us that we can look at big properties slightly different. We will, of course, continue when it's safe to do these larger picks, but we can also host smaller harvests at these properties as well. And we can harvest just as much. So that was definitely a pretty surprising finding for us.
And thankfully, virtual trainings may have been a challenge before COVID-19 due to some technology barriers. But one thing that the pandemic has forced everyone to do is learn how to use Zoom. So that was almost a non-issue, which I truly feel like if we would have started a couple of years ago, may not have been the case. But that's the world we're living in now. And it really highlighted to us, and during the in-person trainings, we were showing them a presentation. So to show them a presentation over Zoom was really just as effective. It also was a lot easier for our staff from different counties. Again, we're working in LA and LA and Ventura County. And so previously they were always done separately because it takes a while to drive and didn't seem functional. But now we were able to very easily have staff from different counties host trainings together, which allowed them to represent their different needs better than we were in the past. In LA, it's a lot of single family homes that we're harvesting. And in Ventura, it's a lot of large agricultural properties with hundreds of trees. And so it allowed us to give our different pitches about our various needs to volunteers across different counties. Make a case for someone in LA, why it would be a great idea to take an hour drive up to Ventura, spend the morning in a lemon orchard, and then, go to the beach or whatever it is. But they were better at making the pitch than someone who's not as familiar with the area. It also allowed us to standardize our trainings by having staff working together in a way that they weren't before. As you know, kind of people work differently sometimes, and by allowing folks to pair up, it mitigated duplication of work and helped standardize a lot of the way that we were sharing information with these volunteers. And, as a whole, they were very well attended, had much fewer no-shows, and had a lot more volunteers showing up that maybe live an hour to 2 hours apart from one another, but because you're just hopping on the computer, it's very easily accessible. And in the end, we ended up hosting more of these trainings than we had even hoped for, and didn't feel like it was really an extra pull on staff because it was done virtually. Our virtual community also thrived. Again, we had to explore new ideas, and what we came up with was a wide variety of different things, everything from game nights We engaged it with some farmers that donate to us and hosted some Q&A sessions about the work that they do, composting workshops, virtual happy hours. Here's a shot from one of those there to the right. And we found that it really allowed for a more diverse group of people to join. You know, geographically, it was easier. There wasn't any limitations based on travel, so we had better attendance. And, you know, maybe it allowed people who maybe previously they don't drink, so showing up to a happy hour wasn't something they were interested in. These events were a lot more open and welcoming to all different types of people. I will say it wasn't always easy. We did have a virtual potluck concept that never really took off. Turns out potlucks are part of all about being in person and sharing and eating food, but we tried. What I think was key was that we remained consistent. We scheduled activities every 4 to 5 weeks, whether it was a happy hour or a discussion on food justice, to really provide that consistency to our network. And we received really great feedback, even if the event if the virtual potluck wasn't that big of a hit. And in addition, beyond the pandemic, we definitely plan to continue hosting virtual gatherings and community events, as well as our trainings.
And so the kind of last question we had here, the last key to this whole equation, was fruit donors. We'd asked them to do more, and it turns out that they will do more. As we've talked about, Sam's mentioned, a lot of our DIYs were heavy lifting on staff. We were dropping off equipment before the harvest, picking it up after the harvest, picking up the fruit and bringing it to an agency after the harvest. And we really had to communicate with the DIY homeowners that that was not going to be the same this year. And we were pleasantly surprised to find that well over 50% of our DIY homeowners now handled the drop off of the fruit to agencies, which was pretty amazing, especially considering pre-pandemic staff were probably spending a couple hours, if not more, a week just with DIY harvests. Just not even the scheduling of DIY harvests, but just getting them equipment, which was a really big time suck on staff time. And we discovered there's only one resource they need, and that's a place to bring the fruit. And we would, they don't need our fancy equipment. They don't need our branded boxes and our fancy pickers. You can use an Amazon box or some grocery bags you have in your hands, and that works perfectly fine. You might not get every single piece of fruit, but whatever you do get and donate is making a difference. And this really did show these homeowners that they are capable of doing more. A lot of them were quite hesitant when we let them know that they would have to pick their own fruit. But after they did it, they really enjoyed it. They got a full circle experience by dropping that produce off at the agency and truly seeing that they were making a difference with that fruit. And many of these homeowners expressed interest in doing this in years to the future, which is great. We are always happy when homeowners want to connect with their backyard and their fruit. That is something that's one of our big goals. So it's really amazing that they loved this experience. And so asking a homeowner with 1 or 2 fruit trees to harvest their own fruit is a much easier ask than saying the same thing to a large orchard. We early on in the pandemic understood we would not get to all of those big orchards that we had in the past. And we had to determine which properties were realistic. So if we didn't have volunteer leaders in the area, if they weren't necessarily in our normal harvest range, we had to be very clear with them and explain to them what our limitations were going to be this year. And also encourage them to get a little bit creative. And so we would encourage them to think creatively, can you recruit some friends? Can you recruit some family? Or for some of these larger orchards, maybe you can hire your crew in or something along those lines. We acknowledge that they might not get all of it, same as with the smaller homeowners, but whatever your pick is needed. And a really good example of that is the Drozd family orchard. I know Mr. Drozd, and I know he has 8 brothers and sisters, and I figured he might be a really good candidate to wrangle his family together. They have 20 navel orange trees, and we normally recruit a couple dozen volunteers and glean 5,000 pounds plus of fruit. And so I talked to Mr. Drozd, and a little hesitant at first, but he was able to wrangle the troops. And as you can see, this is the photo on the right is that harvest. And his whole family was able to glean 7,200 pounds of oranges, which is more than we were actually ever to glean. And his family ended up having a really amazing time. And we'll hopefully do this in the future. So this was an interesting experience, not for just our small homeowners, but for these larger orchards as well, is that they can also harvest their own fruit and give it to people in need and make a really big difference.
So looking back on 2020, we really learned a lot. We streamlined our processes, broke bad habits, and ultimately beat the odds. We created a new and more efficient role for our volunteers. Again, the solo harvester position was not only popular, but very effective, and it will be an opportunity we'll continue to offer. We learned that we can ask our fruit donors and volunteers to do more than we previously were, and we plan to continue to ask them to do more and work as staff to cater less to everyone's specific needs. We were able to maintain great engagement with all of our stakeholders virtually, and as well, we'll continue to hold virtual trainings and engagement activities well beyond the pandemic. And we managed to harvest a lot of fruit with way less people, which taught us to rely less heavily on general volunteers at every single one of our events. So at the this was kind of a snapshot of our program. As the year ended, these lessons resulted in a record-breaking year for our program. We hosted 1,449 events. This includes both our DIY events, which we do also record and track the pounds. I saw someone had a question about that. I can elaborate more. And our volunteer-powered events. We brought in 476,446 pounds of fruit with the help of 93 trained solo harvesters, and shared that with 182 local hunger relief agencies throughout LA and Ventura County. So, you know, as a whole, the changes that were developed in 2020 were done in order to survive the challenges we were faced with that year. But they proved to be concepts that will continue to exist in our programs for years to come, and we really feel like are applicable to groups of all different sizes. Again, we may operate differently than you do, and you may have additional questions, and we'll do our best now. We still have about 10 minutes for questions, but here's Dory and I's contact information. Please feel free to reach out to us. Our organization is also in the process. We've actually just finished creating a document all about our programs that's meant for organizations or individuals that are trying to start up backyard gleaning, farmers market recovery, or wholesale recovery, produce recovery. And we'd be happy to share those documents with you. We're really excited took a long time, so we're excited to share those out as well. And that's it. Let's open it up to questions. Thank you so much for listening to us.
So I guess we can go with the first question is, what does your training cover? Can you explain the difference from a trained volunteer and a general volunteer? So I can dive into that real quick, Sam, if you're okay with that. So our trained volunteers do go through a somewhat rigorous training process. We do ask a lot of our volunteers. It includes a lot of steps before. They have to fill out an application. They have to fill out an NDA, an agreement. And over time, then they attend, it used to be an in-person training, but it's a virtual training. We have a phone call, an onboarding phone call with them. And so there is a fair amount of time commitment that we do ask them to take part in before they're a full-fledged volunteer. But we found it to be pretty effective. It does take a while, but you weed out the people early on that are not truly interested in the experience, which is a huge time saver. Sam kind of pointed out in that slide, but our convergence is normally about 50% from volunteers that start the training process and complete it. So the fact that our solo harvester completion rate was 80% was pretty incredible. So yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah, no, and it's a good point. Go for it, Sean.
I was just going to ask a clarifying question. Is that for anyone who volunteers with your organization or just for people who are actually leading harvest? Do you do phone interviews with all volunteers or in normal times?
No, definitely not. So those are for only our lean volunteers. General volunteers are normally recruited on our website. There's pretty much no prereq for them. They just need to input their email and their name, basic contact information, and they show up to the harvest. And the only training they have is actually at the harvest, which is a 10 to 15 minute intro from our lead trained volunteer. So it's a 15-minute training with no prereqs versus multiple hours of multiple jumps that you need to go through to be a lead volunteer.
Clarifying that.
For sure. And general volunteers, our age minimum is 5. So we really try to keep it open to families, younger folks. There's only a few exceptions maybe where it's all really high fruit, where we'll have it be for older, like 18 and up or 16 and up. But generally the age limit is pretty low. One other thing that Dory mentioned, we have a bunch of different steps. We also do background checks for all of our lead volunteers, which is something we didn't always do, but we found, within our system, they have access to a lot of private information, homeowners' names, numbers, addresses, and they're also dealing with minors a lot because we do open it up to kids. So that was something that we started doing a few years ago as well. It's required for all of our volunteer leads. I see someone had a question. I'm interested in hearing about your volunteer pitch. What platforms, channels do you use to get the word out? And I'm sure I'm not going to be able to encompass all of it. I'll forget some, but again, I'd be happy to elaborate more later. But we use a lot of different channels. The most successful one prior to the pandemic was promoting, and I was talking about volunteer leader pitch, was at the events themselves. Like, we have people, they showed up, they're interested in doing it, promoting, like, did you know I'm a volunteer too? I'm not a paid person, I'm a volunteer, and having those people, our leaders, speak for themselves and help be ambassadors for our organization. We typically were at a lot of tabling events. We post a lot, ask our volunteers to share on Nextdoor, has been heavily, wonderfully successful and actually really easy. We have newsletters that we regularly send out, but really having that word of mouth is really a big success for us. Having our leaders that like what they're doing, providing them with maybe it's the text or the pitch, and asking them to share it out with their network. But that's just kind of scratching the surface. And I believe the Inspire Others document we're talking about has that's the document we've been working on for other gleaning organizations, dives deeper into that as well.
I guess I'll dive into the next one from Amy about liability. Yes, we have full liability insurance, and that is really important to us. And also gives a lot of our homeowners comfort that in case if, let's say a picker goes through a window, that we are fully insured for that.
You never know. Never happened. That's never happened, by the way.
You don't know though. I mean, pickers are dangerous. You gotta be careful. So yeah, we do have full liability insurance for all of our constituents, which is a great sense of comfort to many.
But that is a good point. I mean, part of why our training is so long is we have a lot of safety training. We are also pretty strict. We don't let people climb trees. At least don't tell us about it if you do. And we probably are, we know we're stricter than some gleaning organizations, but to us, you know, liability is an issue. So even with insurance, we want to do what we can to keep people safe. The next question is about some of our engagement activities and if volunteers pay for the barbecues, happy hours, golf, and all of that. That is something that over the years we've built into our budget. We've grown the budget, I should say, but we didn't always have. We still don't have a huge budget. It's maybe a few $100s a year, but we cover all of those costs. But I will say it's a huge, we still do ask a lot for donations of food, of spaces, and you know, a lot of times there are definitely local chefs, local catering companies, or you know, different restaurants, groups that will donate their space or give you a heavy discount. Trader Joe's, Whole Foods. Like I would encourage, if you have zero budget, it is definitely a possibility to get donations, more so than you probably even imagine. So if you don't ask, you bring it out there to your network, or just reaching out and asking people. I think you'd be really surprised with what you're able to get.
Yeah, and we do a fair amount of like free activities. The budget occasionally runs a little low. So we do like hikes, group hikes, and park get-togethers. Everyone bring a sandwich, and you know, so we do get creative with it. And then yeah, Sam kind of answered this, but for DIY harvests, where the homeowner is completing that full circle harvest experience, do you still track the pounds? Yes, we do. We spend a fair amount of time connecting an appropriate agency with the appropriate type of fruit. Certain agencies can take certain types of fruit, and certain homeowners have certain types of fruit. So it's kind of a fun game of connecting all those dots correctly. And it does require a certain amount of effort to make sure that everyone is happy at the end of the day. So we do record that. We ask homeowners to report after they donate the fruit, to let us know what they donated, how much, and also to make sure that the donation experience was pleasant and everything went according to plan.
Yeah, and I'll say that's gotten better over the years, but can still be tricky. You know, we do provide tax write-offs to all of our donors, whether that be a farmer at a farmer's market, a wholesaler, or someone with one tree. And to some people, that's a big draw. To others, they don't care, and they're like, "Oh, I'll just do it." And I've learned. I've been with the organization for over 6 years. At a certain point, it's not worth the time to chase someone down to find out, did you donate 40 pounds of whatever to that food bank? And you just kind of got to let it go. We do like to record them where we can, but you know, I've gotten a lot more lax over the years with the, you know, rigidness of we need to find out, did they donate? You know, just let it be. And when they're only using their hands and their own supplies, they're not borrowing from us, you know, no big deal. It's not like we don't loan out as much equipment as we used to, because that was hard to get back. Someone's asking about the protocols. I know we're like just at the end. Or Sean, are we at the end? I think so. Just struck 2. Sean, you're muted. Well, everybody, these are great questions, and we'd love to answer them. You have our contact info. Would love to keep the conversation going. Thank you so much.